Hi, Cody Alexander. Welcome to the Art of X show. Usually I am a solo show, but today I brought in my good friend, Shawn Syed, who is the Director of Communications for Sumer Sports. He's a good friend of mine. In fact, Shawn and I became really close because he followed me around my last year of coaching football, which I'm sure was a learning experience for him as well. And it was nice to have him around. So I consider Shawn family. I'm excited to have him on. So Shawn, thank you for being here. Introduce yourself and kind of tell everybody what you do and kind of about our relationship.
Cody, you mean so much. Yeah, it was a really fun time. One of my first years in Texas, growing up in New Jersey, visiting all these different sorts of places, seeing, different offenses, different defenses, different kinds of schools, different kinds of teams. And it was a really, really unique experience, hearing firsthand from you, seeing the defense that you were implementing in the offseason with those kids. It was a lot of fun for me. And yeah, now I'm at Sumer Sports full time, having a lot of fun over there, doing some fun projects internally. And then on the outside, writing some articles at sumersports.com. I'm excited, this whole season to be writing up stuff. I know I'm a defensive guy at heart, but obviously we started on the offensive end with that Shanahan article, but going to be a fun season for both of us this year.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to link that Shanahan article in there. It's really good. He kind of breaks down the basic run, kind of the basic run game of the Shanahan system, which obviously is the foundational deal. I do want to talk to you a little bit about what was your experience, because I think, a lot of people see me as just like a talking head on here or on Twitter, but they don't necessarily know kind of what it was like. Life school was such an interesting place. I did get to coach with my dad, but we were fighting an uphill battle pretty much every day. And just to get kids out and just to play, you got to go to kind of some 4A football in Texas is a little bit different than the 5A, 6A that I think a lot of people see on TV and from around. So just kind of give a few kind of tidbits from that.
Yeah, I think it was really, really cool, I think, to watch you and your dad coaching together. That's something that was really, really special. And, just seeing you're a human being, right? Seeing the different emotions of a sideline, I think is really, really fun. And, those offensive guys are always doing their best to put up points. So it was a really, really unique experience. And just seeing all the different towns in Texas, even at you said at the 4A level, I mean, some of those stadiums are just knockout beautiful, and in towns that maybe you wouldn't expect it, but oh yeah, a lot of fun memories for both of us, I know. And seeing the ups and downs through a coach, like on Netflix, there's that quarterback series. Like, of course, players, it's such a human experience. They have to, deal with all those pain. And I think the same way the coaches are dealing with, their own personal expectations, outside expectations, and trying to put together something special. So I know it was a year I think both of us aren't going to forget.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, like, I have such a respect for you, because like you came to everything. You came to our scrimmage when we looked like we were going to be world beaters, and then kind of after every week, just trying to piece it together and trying to keep my sanity through it, trying to like juggle so many different things that were going on. And that's a unique experience, I know, for that school. And so just a unique experience for me. And so I just have always had great respect for you. And I think that's why we're such good friends now, is because, talking to you week in and week out about that whole process. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no better place to learn from straight from the coach, right? From the guy who writes the books. I think it was good to bounce ideas off each other and, continue to learn, and obviously continue to learn today with how much stuff we've been watching.
Yeah, so let's jump into it. So really the topics a lot for this episode is really going to be what are trends in football. Primarily focus is going to be on the NFL, but we can bring in some college stuff as well. But the very first thing that I want to talk about is really there's a continued rise of a too high shell. I've always said, like, 2018 broke football. We're in a different era. So you have pre-2018, you can look at, I mean, literally, you can look at any kind of data, whether you're using True Media, PFF, Sumer Sport, whatever. You can use whatever data you want to use. But 2018, something changes. And so talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing. Why do you think there's a too high shell? And kind of also, why do we see this rise in quarters?
Yeah, of course, 2018, that first thing you're going to think about and point to is that explosion of the Rams offense, right? Of course, I think they got into a lot of their no huddle stuff that caused a lot of problems from the defense. And, Jordan Rodriguez did an amazing job on the play callers on the Athletic Football Show podcast feed. And they talked about, McVay kind of took that through LaFleur from Shanahan. So that caused so many problems, and really just being able to fit the run from a little bit more depth in order to stop that, particularly like that big crossing route in the play action game. I think being out of a too high shell, it gives you so much more flexibility in that way, and just the continued prioritization of, look, the passing game is so effective. We need to be able to stop the explosives, right? Not just fully at the cost of the run, right? You obviously still need to have your big players to stop the run. And then obviously that Rams defense under Staley, having Aaron Donald, a guy like that that's able to cause problems, makes things a lot easier. And I think because we see more too high shells on the front end of that, we do see a lot more light boxes as well. So where in 2018, that McVay offense had so much success just running straight, wide zone and mid zone to the weak side, really without having to have a fullback. Obviously, they had Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods in that way. I think that's forcing defensive fronts to be stronger. And now, to me, along with those two high shells, defenses have really evolved to take care of that one back outside zone run game really, really well, to the point where offenses are really going to be forced, I think, to, you got to bring in maybe bigger personnel or maybe a fullback there to really expand your kind of running menu.
Yeah, and I think the fullback, I don't necessarily think will come back, just because I think with analytics and the way that roster building in the NFL, you're not going to put it, and especially like when you get a guy who really is just a lead blocker, to me, you get what like the Ravens have done, where they just took like a guard or a D tackle and they kind of made a fullback because he's super, he's athletic enough that if we need to throw him into that, we can. So it'll be interesting. I think 12 personnel and 13 personnel. I know 13 personnel has been a huge talking point in the offseason. I think at the lower levels, at the high school and the college level, I think 12 personnel is going to become kind of a bigger deal. You talked about coverage flexibility, and that's the one thing, like when you go to why the rise of quarters, and something that I've always talked about is really that fluidity within the quarter scheme. Whereas in cover two, just a true blue cover two, not really even talking Tampa, but just like a cover two system, is that's those safeties have to have these umbrella caps, right? They have to work to depth. They have to cap everything. Corners are working outside in. So you have these voids within the middle of the field, which is where, again, the quarterbacks are throwing right in front of them, which is always going to be more accurate. So I truly believe like why quarters, and it was highlighted by Belichick in the Super Bowl against the Rams, was when you have quarters, you can get these rotations, right? You can get these rotations within the scheme that you might not be able to get if you just run a Tampa 2 or a cover 2 or what we're seeing now with these non-traditional Tampas. So I think, too, that's why quarters is, and two, you're all, and also you're, like you said, with the capping of the receivers. I've got a defender, I got a DB on top of every receiver. You give me motion, we're even, so we can adjust to it. So talk to me a little bit about how kind of the Shanahan system in particular, McVay system in particular, has reacted to some of these quarters looks.
Yeah, I think, the Shanahan system, or I always, think of Kyle Shanahan first, because of course it is very different. Their offense is really different than what the Rams are running under McVay. And they run into the heaviest boxes, right? But they also end up getting the highest amount of cover 3. So really one way I think to force teams out of that shell is, hey, look, if you're going to match up our, eye right look with your 2 high shell, and we're happy to run the ball down your throat, eventually I think a defensive coordinator may get a little impatient with that and want to roll a guy down into that box pre-snap. So having that fullback, I think it's something, we'll see with the Falcons, where, as you said, it might not be a dedicated fullback, but whether it's a tight end, hybrid body type on the offensive side that can, move gaps one way or the other, I do think that's an effective way for offenses to, they got to do what they can to get you out of those 2 high looks. But also, if a team is happy to stay in some form of quarters, quarter, half, quarter, they're going to do their best really to conflict the heck out of that, quarters flat defender, either if it's on one side or especially when it's a weak side linebacker. The 49ers, of course, have Christian McCaffrey. They're running those choice routes now on both sides. That would cause problems for any defender. But I think using formationally and then taking advantage of that matchup, I think the 49ers are going to be happy to take that running back in space, especially McCaffrey against the linebacker a lot of those times.
Yeah, and I think most NFL teams are looking for a pass catching tight end. Then they want a kind of a hybrid tight end that, hey, if we need to throw him the ball, he can catch it, but if we need him to block, he can. And then your third tight end you're carrying is really kind of a glorified tackle. I mean, that, to me, that's where I see this. And so why 13 personnel? Why more 12 personnel? Well, like you just hit it. If we go big, and we start running the ball, what is the natural reaction? We're going to have to get into more of these cover 3 looks, which then opens up we know exactly what we want. We want single high. And if you talk to any offensive coordinator, there are certain things that they want to see, right? They, a lot of them that are zone heavy, they want you to get into an open B gap bubble so that they can get an RPO, right? They want a single high coverage so that they know exactly we have either the underneath quick and I can give it to my quick speedy receiver now on a hitch route, or I know I've got slant routes because they're playing match 3. It's a lot of rip Liz and outside alignments, right? Off the divider rules. Or I know I can get the deep cross. So it opens up our play action game. I think a great example of this goes a couple years ago when the Packers and Aaron Donald was hurt, and you have the Packers versus the Rams. And so what they did is gotten 3-by-1 alignments, and they just ran the ball because they knew eventually the safety was going to have to make a tackle on a phone booth, and he didn't. Right. So what is the adjustment? Now we bring our safety down. We get in these cover 3 looks. And that's when the Packers were able to hit those late in the game play action passes and those deep shots to really win the game. So to me, there's a natural evolution in football. We're seeing it. But again, we're going back. We have to have the framework of this is the post-spread era. So we are in post-2018. Offenses understand how to create space using some of these air raid concepts or these kind of air Coryell concepts that have kind of been meshed with West Coast offense and this big mishmash of offensive, where everybody knows the beaters. So I do really think that is, like you said, that's kind of the trend there.
I think, cover 3 on defense is obviously, it's a sound coverage in a lot of ways. It's something that it's always going to be around the NFL, right? Cody, I know your show is named Match Quarters, but right, cover 3, it's going to be there in some sort of way. And the way that the play action system, particularly, the way that I think Shanahan drew it up really for a long time is to beat cover 3, right? That middle of the field safety is going to get conflicted for sure in some sort of way, right? There's almost always going to be a high crossing route, in that, 15 kind of climbing up to 22 area where if that middle of the field safety is going to want to hammer down on that crossing route, there's going to be something coming from the other side, whether it's a big post over the top, whether, they call it a blazer route where they'll expand that cornerback outside a little bit so the receiver can get up inside there. There's a great example last year from Geno Smith throwing a perfect ball into the end zone. And they do so much to make the life easier for the quarterback. And if you're a quarterback and you're at base, you're seeing, 50% cover 3, I think that's going to it just makes your life a lot easier in what you can get to.
Right. And so going on with that, like, what are the differences between like high school, college, and the NFL? From what I've really heard the past couple of years, especially from guys that are around the NFL, is a lot more maybe spot drop, a lot more zone match. We're seeing a lot less man match at the NFL level. I think because you see the game is played in the middle of the field, the talent differential is so razor thin. At the college level, especially, go look at, the big thing now is everybody wants to run rip Liz from a 2-high shell. That's kind of what I've been hearing from a lot of people. They want these coverage rotations. We're going to run a lot of man match. I think the Saban really think about it. The last 5 years, everybody on the planet at the lower levels is trying to learn some sort of cover 7 or rip Liz match, trying to get into the Saban universe, this man match. Well, the problem is at the higher levels, you're creating man coverage at every level. So then it becomes a matchup game. That's why I think you see more of these zone match principles at the NFL. And it trends, right? If you go and you look at cover 1 rates, 2019, we're at 29.4% cover 1 and using PFF. It's 29.4% of the coverage is called. You go all the way to last year, that dropped 10 percentage points almost to 19.8. Why are people running less cover 1? And it has to do with those matchups and these over routes. You're creating track meets. I'm a DB coach. I always have been, and I played corner my entire life. So it's like, I used to tell my guys, we don't want to create track meets, right? We don't want to get in situations where we're running after guys. Well, when offenses know they've got cover 1, right? Okay, fine. We'll run Tyreek Hill across the field. I know that your defender may be good, but he's not as fast as Tyreek Hill. So all I got to do is just make sure that I protect long enough or get some sort of play action to bring in a little bit of space. And then I just got to throw it. The quarterback just has to throw it right in front of him. So I think that's why we've seen a lot of less match coverage. And I think with more of the run game getting involved in it, the quarterback run game in particular, we're going to see less and less man match coverage. We're going to see less and less man. It's going to be more zone coverage.
Yeah, the quarterback, once you involve the quarterback in the run game, it's just such a math changer, right? It's the offense is able to be +1. I think you see it, of course, with Jalen Hurts. And even, offenses like the Giants are actually really fun to watch because it's not that Daniel Jones has a million carries, but the way that he gets involved, it adds a huge, huge, huge responsibility for the defense. And I think you see it in that 49ers Eagles playoff game where, yeah, linebackers are going to have to freeze at a certain point because someone has to be responsible for the quarterback. And then I think the Eagles did a really unique job in that game also. We're going to spread it out. We're going to get it into empty. And, we're happy to have a Kelsey brother pulling up into open space on your weak side linebacker. We have no problem with that as an offense. And I think each year, of course, it's really hard to play man coverage because receivers are so talented, right? How many times are we going to have to cover Devonta Smith in the slot running a choice route? That's going to be tough. And then also, of course, the rules are in the offense's advantage, right? I'm sure you'd want your guys to be grabbing a little bit here and there, but the rules just stop that, right? So that, and then even seeing, the Saints sometimes, or of course the Patriots, like the Patriots will have this kind of one double robber coverage where it's not like, I wouldn't characterize it as cover 7 because, those safeties aren't really locked onto a person. They're kind of holding the hash, eyeing quarterback intentions, but it gets to feel more like, okay, both of these safeties are really, really involved in the coverage in a way that they're not just kind of, that ceiling level of the defense. But yeah, if your quarterback can scramble, you're not going to want all your DBs with your eyes to receivers because once, you break that first level, you see Justin Fields kind of running down the field. So I think you make a really good point, especially with how thin those margins are with, of course, with athleticism at a certain point too, right? Your linebackers are able to close in, but offenses, I think they can feel more comfortable sometimes where I'm teaching my guy, hey, look, you obviously have to look at your first read, work to your second one, but take off after that, right? If you can create a play on the ground, it's such a backbreaker for a defense, I think, on 3rd and 5 when you let up that 6-yard scramble. And then you have guys like Mahomes who it seems like he is, whatever his speed is, he's just fast enough to get the first down. And that's, I think, it makes you pull your hair out as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because again, at the high school level and the college level, we hear all the time about the Saban cover 7 and how great it is and all the checks and it answers all these problems and all the different variations of it and the man match. And again, it goes back to they've got dudes at every level, right? I never forget, I said one time, I was like, what coverage is it? What's your favorite coverage? Blah, blah. Obviously I'm MatchQuarters, but when I was at Horn, we had 5 Division I athletes. I'm playing cover 1, right? I mean, I've got my middle field safety who he's now going to be playing at TCU. We had our Sam linebacker who is now going to be at Baylor playing star for them. I had 2 outside corners, one's at SFA, one's at UTEP, and then I had another kid that was a sophomore that's going to Texas State. I'm playing cover 1, man. Like, and especially like at the 6A level, we saw so much RPO. Right, so much RPO. We're playing bracket out of a 3 high, which nobody does, but we found a way to do it. So we're playing bracket, and then off of that, we're going to play cover 1, and we're gonna eliminate everything. So I think it's like, to me, match 3, cover 1, that makes sense to me at the lower levels. Quarters coverage when you're playing like 9-man spacing because you're playing a lot of run heavy and we've got DBs. I want to cap verticals. That makes sense to me. When you go to the NFL, you go look at what happened in 2019. Everybody was like, fine, you're going to run RPOs. That's great. We're just going to man coverage because, again, what is the best answer? And we saw Sarkisian talk about this a couple of years in a coaching clinic. It's like, you guys better have answers for cover 1 because that's going to be the first answer for every defense is, hey, you're going to run RPOs and you're going to have the quarterback like that. Okay, fine. We know that you want to throw first, not necessarily maybe run your quarterback at some of these places. And so we're going to run cover 1. We're just going to say eliminate receivers. Well, we saw that in the NFL. I mean, almost 30% of the calls were cover 1. And then you go back to the next year and everybody's like, let's tone it down. Now it's down to a quarter. Oh, now it's okay. We're getting burned. Now it's down to about 20%. And then now you see that it's just constantly going down in the NFL. And I think it's because that in that ecosystem, the quarterback has never really been a running guy. Yes, you've had Fran Tarkenton. Yes, you've had John Elway. Yes, you've had Steve Young. Yes, you've had Michael Vick, imagine Michael Vick in this. When I take a pause every time, I'm like, could you imagine Michael Vick playing now? Like, this is the era that he was born in era before. But you see this, and yes, cover 1 in these match coverages are great. right? Think about who has Nick Saban always struggled against, and it's always been an elite running quarterback. Why? Because if you go cover 7 and you go spread to run, right, it does end up like 2-man. And now I know Carl Scott might be sending laser beams in my head right now, but at the end result, right, like if we just fast forward through the play to the end result, we've got backs turned, right, we've got capping safeties, and it almost ends up like 2-man right after the switch. Now we all know it's not 2-man, okay, we're not dense, but that has always been the struggle. So you see more zone match coverages. I think that's why you see more zone match coverages in the NFL. And that's why that running quarterback, again, game changer. Now it's introduced into the NFL ecosystem, and we're kind of seeing defenses feel their way out.
Yeah, I think the cover 1 point it's really important, right? I think of course, on a chalkboard, we think, okay, these offenses do such a good job in the RPO game. How do we possibly get people out of conflict? Exactly. You play cover 1, obviously that opens up a whole entire another bag of issues. But yeah, the way to get your nickel out of conflict, one way, there's so many, I think, different ways, whether it's, reading the way the quarterback turns, having more of a sling fit kind of thing. But if your nickel is playing just man on that receiver, they don't have a run responsibility. They're not in conflict. And it makes sense. I think offensive coordinators, they do a great job, right? Obviously the Dolphins, with the way they get those motions going across, I do think the offenses in the NFL have been a little more open to using those, fast motions, snapping the ball exactly then. We're going to take the risk that we're probably not going to get a penalty thrown on this if our guys working towards the line a little bit, using that as a way to force either defenses out of man coverage or just, creating that natural rub just based on formation, motion, and alignment to cause kind of conflict there. So even when you see less cover 1 on first and second down, I do think that with the last time I looked at it, cover 1's still probably the most popular coverage on third downs.
Yeah.
And I do think what I've liked from a 2-eye shell, you can get to different ways to manipulate one of your safeties, right? Even if you're going to end up with the middle of the field hole safety, you can have, one safety coming down, whether it's in one cross where you're kind of collecting that crossing route from the backside of a 3-by-1, or, a lot of times they'll do it where they'll drop just to a receiver. So it becomes a functional bracket in a way, but you can use your 2-eye shell, still play cover 1, and try and manipulate at least one double team. Now, the problem is that when teams have 2 really good receivers, obviously, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith is an easy example. You're going to have more problems there, right? Because eventually, as you said, I know you call it, right, man-to-man coverage, cat football, right? Just like Saban said. So eventually, not that you're going to be exposed, but it's such a razor thin margin, I think, such a matchup league in the NFL that once you get one matchup where the offense is comfortable exploiting it, the offensive coordinator is just going to hit that all day.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thing that you see in the NFL, and that's the choice that you have to make is we're either going to play like a one lurk, right, where the linebacker is going to be the rat, right? Or we're going to play some sort of a one cross where we're going to bring a safety down as kind of that middle hole cut cross player. And so that's kind of what you have to choose from, right? And that's why I think too, with a guy like Bijan Robinson, a guy like Christian McCaffrey, some of these other receiver-like running backs, it really stresses the defense. And so on third down, if you don't want a coverage bust, what's the best thing that you can do is play man match coverage or play some sort of a man coverage cover 1. And so, as you said, it's a matchup league. That's why on a lot of third downs, what do? You get empty checks, right? They're going to send the running back out as wide as they possibly can because they want to see, are you going to put a DB on them or are you going to put a linebacker on them? If you put a linebacker on them, we know you're in man coverage, right? Or you're in some sort of specialized coverage. But now I've got a one-on-one on the running back. I know that right now. So now I'm just going to run some sort of route with the running back that I know I'm going to win with, right? Especially if I have a running back that can catch the ball. Otherwise, if I don't like it, I get a zone check. Okay, fine. Now I'm going to bring the running back in. Now I know exactly what coverage we got. So I do think you do see cover 1 less on regular downs. It's still the number one on third. And I think a lot of that has to do, if you think about it mentally as a defensive coach, it's like, look, I don't want to screw up third down, right? And third down is probably the most game plan down of anything, okay? Because you're not running your base defense at that point. You're running a stop because, hey, this is what they're doing on 3rd and 3 to 6. This is what they're doing on 3rd and 7 to 10. This is what they're doing on 3rd and 11 plus, right? And so I think you've kind of broken it down and you spent more time doing that. So I do think that and you talked about it. Actually, I think one of your colleagues talked about it. Your one of your interns talked about it in a Sumer article here recently about mobile quarterbacks and how the scramble game is actually kind of exploded in the NFL, and it's making it more difficult. So I am interested to see too, even on third down, how much more cover one we're going to see.
Yeah, McKenna Hack did a really good job, one of our interns at Sumer, on that article, just showing, a lot of different things, but also, look, there are more scrambles in the NFL. And I think that that's going to continue to rise, particularly one, the thing of the rookie quarterbacks coming in, all those guys can move, right? And that is such an important beater to really any defense, right? Especially, we keep on seeing that cover one. And you mentioned getting that running back out in formation. Obviously defenses, their empty menu is going to be a little bit less, right? And I think on third down, as you said, it is so game plan dependent. Teams want to get into their pressure packages. A lot of that is tied to cover one, I think, in a lot of different ways where, they're going to have either maybe it's a daylight rush, maybe something like a green dog, or, your ends are going to peel in some sort of way. So they feel comfortable, keep that back end protection. Let's play with more guys on the back end against only 4 receivers instead of 5. And on the offensive end, getting the Shanahan system, all those guys, they love, if you're in 11 personnel, you have one of your best receivers on the same side as your running back and empty as a 2 side, and then a tight end, 2 receivers the other way. And it does, it forces the defense to declare, especially when defenses, they won't line up their nickel to the passing strength, right? Which, of course, that makes sense. Right. But that's going to mean sometimes if you're a nickel, your weak side linebacker is going to be one-on-one with the best receiver. And that's something that I think the offenses continue to try and exploit, especially, I think the Eagles did it. You saw it versus the Vikings a lot. And the Vikings defense, it's an interesting point because if you're just static, not that you have to move particularly, but if you're going to play the same coverages over and over, you are going to run into problems. The offense is just too good at it. I really do love Brandon Staley. I think one of the biggest plays of the year from a schematic standpoint, thinking about it, was that big touchdown by the Jaguars where the Chargers play that cover 8, where they're playing half quarter with the half to that 3-by-1 or to the 3 receiver side. And Doug Peterson did a great job, right? I think he knew that he was going to get the weak side safety hammering down kind of hard and early, and they can get that number 2 on that big over where, like you said, they made it a track meet against their nickel. And so I'm interested to see, what is Staley going to pull out? Because I think he's really great at game planning. I think, of course, he comes from a sound system where he can combine different things, and not that he takes from Saban particularly, but he'll use, I think, some of those concepts. So, I do think the defense was maybe a little bit ahead of offenses last year as an overall. And I think, it's going to be time for the offense to punch back.
Yeah, it always happens that the defenses get a little bit ahead, but it's very short-lived. I mean, you go look at the history of the NFL and almost anything. I mean, you can go look at even Tampa 2. It was such a very short-lived era. And it's kind of almost overstated because a lot of those Tampa 2 defenses really were just cover 3 heavy. It was the Tampa 2 on defined passing situations. And they have, monsters like Urlacher who can just run through, and Derek Brooks who can just run through the middle of the field like a safety, but they're at, 235, 245 pounds. So you do have that, but it is short-lived. The Jaguars clip is a great example of manipulating a poach safety and being able to get underneath of that. And I also think too, with going back to your one cross, is that a lot of these double crosses, when they know that they're getting zone again, trying to capture that post safety, that cut safety or whatever. Now I've created a high-low layer, and so now I've got that. And so I see where a lot of defensive coaches are thinking in, okay, we can man up, but then we can cut a low cross and then keep that post safety in there to cut the high cross as well. Let's rewind it just a little bit. Let's go back to more of the run game. So defenses have now been built to stop the wide zone. And I think it was even highlighted in, you mentioned Jordan Rodriguez, the Play Callers podcast. It was even mentioned in there is that teams became so good with either a 4-down wide 9 or with the penny front 5-1. How, to me, the introduction into odd front looks, how are you now going to adjust as an offense? What are you seeing and what is trending now?
Yeah, I think that the smartest way that teams do it is they're not just running wide zone. They're not running it into the wall, right? Like you are going to get stopped in a lot of ways where defenses, they've repped it, but also, the proliferation of coaches from the wide zone system are probably on your team in some sort of way. Gotten so many reps at this. I love that Kyle Shanahan has adapted in different ways. And it's not that he's running 50% gap scheme. but they are more than happy to just have Trent Williams wash down your 4-eye, right? He has no problem with that at all. Get someone pulling out, especially if you have that your edge defender has a pretty wide 9, right? He can create a crease there. They were, something that I think I saw the term from Bobby Peters first, but they call it counter solid, where wash down that front side of the line and your pullers, instead of it being GT counter or GY counter, it's Kittle and Juszczyk coming down there, right? So they can have that full front side wash. So I think teams that are more comfortable getting into that gap scheme, again, not that you have to run at 50%, but just that 4-eye, it's a tough technique to deal with, right? That left tackle, if they want to get up to the next level on zone, like how are they going to do it if you're not just having them kick out that kind of wide 9 defensive end? So if you can get into gap scheme, get into the counter, I would love to see, a rise of counter, force those defenses, do we have to get back to an even front? Do we have to play, under in some sort of way? So get into those gap scheme looks and create just more problems for the defense that way.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why at the college level, you saw the really the mint and the tight front kind of, a lot of people went more towards a peso. I mean, you go look at, which is basically just a 2-4-5 with 2 stand-up edges. So you take your nose out, or you take one of your D ends out, and now you're running really an over G front with 2 backers, and then 2, like the exploration of and kind of the evolution of getting odd spacing within a 4 down. Right, Georgia with the 5-man pressures, trying to get one-on-ones with their monster guys. I think that's kind of at the lower levels. That's kind of been the evolution. Now you've got Dave Aranda, who he's got all the tools in his toolbox to kind of figure it out. Right, they have an answer for everything. When you want to run this gap scheme, we've got this adjustment in the front. So this week you're a counter team or a dart team or whatever you are. So we're going to run this adjustment in the tight front. But really at that marriage of the 4 down and the odd front, I think at the college level, that's really where we're seeing this. Whereas in the NFL, it's kind of always been everybody inside, especially in nickels, kind of played gap and half, because those linebackers have to be able to read the running back, and they have to kind of fit more, a little bit less on ball fit. I do think that because the linebackers are now playing slower to the run, your interior defensive linemen have to be pretty solid. I was talking to on a Locked On Packers podcast the other day, and it was, what are some of the issues you're seeing within the run game? Because the Packers they were great in secondary, but in terms of run, they had the highest rate of explosive runs in the NFL. And a lot of times you're just watching their interior guys get bounced, right? Dallas, I'm located here in DFW. So I hear about Dallas and all their problems against the run game, right? Well, what was the major issue with them? Well, again, their interior defensive linemen just are not strong enough to hold up on those double teams when you're playing a lot of nickel and dime, which is a 4 down front. Right. So that is why do you think the Dallas went and got Mazi Smith from Michigan? It makes sense. You've got to find these guys. Why are we seeing high caliber inside defensive linemen getting paid? Go look at the top run stopping defenses. I mean, it's the Titans, who terrible in secondary, but man, they got a really good front. Right. And so it's, the Washington Commanders, another great example. Those 2 interior defensive linemen, I think anybody in the NFL would take those 2 interior defensive linemen. The Jets, interior defensive linemen. Quinn Williams just got paid. So I think, to me, that will have to be, if you're going to live in nickel, you're going to live in dime. One, you better have a big safety, which we're seeing. Look at what Bill Belichick's doing. He's basically, 10 years ago, it was all about his tight ends and hybrid tight ends. Now he's saying, look, man, I'm going to play defense with a whole bunch of safeties that look like linebackers, right? You got Jabril Peppers, you got Duggan. Now they got the Mapu kid from Sac State, which everybody's raving about right now. We'll see if he develops. Again, rookies, you never know until they start playing. So I think that, to me, the wide zone, now that we've kind of contained it, gap scheme is coming involved. How are these hybrid defenders going to play into that?
Yeah, I think the Belichick example is so funny, because when you watch their defense, it almost sometimes it can look like that amoeba defense, because there's so much versatility from each of those guys, right? Safeties that can cover, linebackers that can run, and people that they're more than happy to get into that run fit and cause problems that way. So something I do want to see from offense is a little more, obviously, get heavier, right? Force the defense to let me test all those guys out, see how happy they are to really get in that B gap as often as possible. But I would also want to see just more heavy play action, deeper play action shots. Because obviously, right, if the defense wants to put a ceiling over over the offense, blow that ceiling off, right? Run the deepest deep post to really, really test those guys as maybe not as often as you can, but those max protect shots where it's just going to be two receivers, maybe a late check down, but something that is going to cause, I think, more problems in a different way, because I do think defenses are going to have to not necessarily manipulate their run fits, because we do know a lot of times, from too high, it's usually that weak safety rotating down. So you have your kind of basic things, and maybe it's not, hey, we're going to have our free safety just plug the A gap this week, but being able to be a little bit more multiple on defense, whether it's, using those run stunts inside where your defensive end can cut inside, having that linebacker kind of scrape over the top, those different things in the run game, I think will be interesting to see. And, you're obviously hoping you're not just getting washed down, but if there's enough space for your linebacker to fill in that gap, I think there's ways the defense can get into different looks on the front end and back end to cause some issues for the gap scheme game, or also just deal with some of those new surfaces that they're going to be seeing more of.
Yeah, and so I don't think people are going to go away from the nickel. I don't think people are going to go away from the penny front, if that's what the kind of the hybrid way. And to me, the nickel and the penny really just depends on what you have on your roster. If you have a plethora of inside linemen that you feel comfortable with, maybe you got some workhorses like a Greg Gaines. I think with the Rams, he's not sexy, but man, he's a nose and he can control the center. And so you get guys like that. It's like, okay, maybe we can kind of play a little bit more 5-1, whereas a lot of guys are just saying, hey, let's just play nickel. Let's just let's get our two edges being boxers, right? Let's get an interior push up the field with our inside guys. Linebackers can kind of slow fit everything, and then we keep our 5-man front. It's a little bit more traditional. So as we see this nickel and these hybrid kind of defenses, offense is getting bigger personnel, obviously is going to be something for the light box. Talk to me about what you're seeing in particular with NFL offenses in that nature.
Yeah, I think offenses are going to be happy to get, those two tight ends on the field. And sometimes, like the Chiefs have been using that 13 personnel where they actually have a lot of efficiency out of that, because defense has to make a choice at some level, right? Are we going to keep our base personnel out there? Are we going to stay in nickel versus that? And I think you mentioned the penny front, and that's a good example where actually the coverage menu from the penny front is relatively limited, right? It's not that you can get, I think, to every single coverage in the world from penny. Basically, a lot of times you're going to have that weak side linebacker who's essentially an edge player and that dropping out in some sort of way. So that kind of limits your coverage menu. So offenses that have the ability to get into heavy sets and pass out of that. So if the defense is giving you that base 3-4 look, make that edge guy walk out a little bit, right? If he's not going to walk out there, we can get to something quick in the pass game. The drift concept where it's basically just, hey, turn your back, play action, or really quick, 7 steps, turn over, find the hole, right? Can we pass out of a heavy set? And then can we run sometimes out of these pass looks, right? The penny front is, I think, a problem for a lot of offenses because, like you said, covering that center causes a lot of problems. It makes you, when you look at the playbooks and stuff, usually the kind of variations are really drawn up to odd fronts, right? Yeah. Because they don't have the same angles, right? They have the center covered. So can you pass out of those sets and just really keep the defense uneasy in some sort of way? So to me, true balance, true versatility on offense is, can we get to some of our pass concepts out of these run heavy looks, and not necessarily, hey, we're just going to run inside zone from 2x2 sets because that's a base run. I think the defense is set up to stop that, but can we really, really keep the defense honest and uneasy and feel like on the offensive end, hey, we're in the right personnel, we've gotten to the right formation, and understanding it's not just that we need to use motion, but do we have purposeful motions, right? Because even if the box count isn't something you love, you can push those linebackers over, or you can, change your count, get the center pulling one way, pulling in the sense of like if he's targeting the center, hey, now we're targeting a different linebacker, right? You're moving the count one way because your motion can manipulate it, right? So can you get to the different balance? Can you understand how to use purposeful motion and not just motion for motion's sake to cause problems for the defense?
Yeah, I really think it's kind of the inverse of what McVay kind of established with the Rams was, we're going to play 11 personnel, but we're going to have 12 personnel and 21 personnel run game out of it. So yeah, we're getting you in these light boxes, but then we're giving you a true power game because I have these workhorse guys at receiver who are not only like Cooper Kupp, who is an elite receiver. He's one of the best in the NFL, but he also is not afraid to block. And I think that, to me, if I'm a receiver coach, right, and I'm even a corners coach now, and I'm listening to this, and I'm seeing what the trends are, it's gonna trickle down, right? As much as it trickles up, there are elements of the game that also trickle down. Corners now have to be able to tackle because one, you're either having to tackle in space, right, off of a receiver who is built like a running back a lot of the times now, or you're going to have to be matched up with a running back, right? I'm going to have to bring him down on a 5-yard hitch. Okay. Or I'm going to have to fit the run on wide zone, or I'm going to fold back in because we're getting these condensed sets. But at the opposite of that is receivers now are going to have to block, right? If you no block, no rock, right? And I think that to me is one of the things where the disconnect of 7-on-7 culture with football is that you still have to run the football to play football. You still have to run. Kirby Smart's famous line of you have to be able to stop the run to defend the pass. That's it. I mean, you're talking about from one of the best defensive minds in all of football. He's telling you, you have to stop the run. So I think it's kind of like I said, it's the inverse. Teams are now going to start saying, okay, we're going to go 12 personnel, kind of at volume. What are some 11 personnel looks that we can get to? What are some 10 personnel stuff? Because I mean, the Eagles did a good job too. Sometimes they just go 4 wide with two tight ends to kind of get that space, either to spread to run, or to get those linebackers out of the box, or to with Goddard to get hey, here's a mismatch on a linebacker, or we now are in predictable zone coverage. We know what your coverage is going to be, whether they spun down, they're going to declare it because it's 12 personnel. So I think it's kind of that inverse effect, and you've seen that now the pendulum swing back. Now we're in 12 personnel and 13 personnel, and we're trying to find 11 personnel plays, but you have no idea on defense because you're putting your package out there according to what our package is.
Yeah, I think that I like that Kirby Smart line. It seems like protecting the pass or playing the pass, it's a privilege, right? You do have to earn your way there. You have to be able to stop the run game. And of course, the modern offense, it's absolutely a passing league, right? I think both of us are at least positive on the analytics side. We understand and obviously know that teams should be passing more and more, right? It is a more efficient play, but football is never going to get away from the run game, and teams that are able to understand that and force defenses back into getting into heavier boxes, they're going to really have an advantage. And I think something that I've loved seeing from, I think McVay's definitely using this, and Shanahan too, is their full blocks, where something that makes offense unique, or not unique, but they do a lot of these condensed sets where receivers are, they'll be lined up really almost tight, where that edge defender has to kind of peek their eye out a little bit. And the receivers will literally just give, a quick jab. And a lot of times it's enough to mess with that edge defender a little bit so that the tight end can come and clear it out. Or, it's someone, if they're picking up that double in some sort of way, they're able to just have a little bit of an advantage because that split second counts. And as you said, yeah, those receivers, they have to block, right? Because I think, a lot of times, it's the front side that, wins games, but the backside wins championships. And whether it's that receiver cutting off a safety, really being able to dig that guy out, receivers that can do that. You see Brandon Ayuk do it a lot more. Deebo Samuel will do it too. Obviously, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods were the classic examples, but receivers that can get their nose dirty in that run game, it makes the offensive coordinator happy. It causes problems for the defense. And, a cornerback that has to keep stepping up. You're that cloud corner in cover 6. We want to roll the ball off the table. Yeah, make that cornerback tackle, right? Obviously Alex Gibbs is more than happy to see cornerbacks be forced to tackle. And, hopefully I think he just got on the ballot for the Hall of Fame. I'm sure he'll end up there. He deserves it. And yeah, the more cornerbacks that tackle, I think the better it's going to be for offenses.
Yeah, and really, I go back to high school guys kind of sometimes roll their eyes. I think older high school guys kind of roll their eyes when people talk about the NFL and some of these things like, oh, well, that's the NFL. We can't really do that. We don't have that kind of kids. I'll just be honest with you. I for my very first year at Midlothian in 2017, I had to go up against John Kitna, who was at Waxahachie High School. And I think that was the most condensed sets that I had ever had to defend, not defending a flex bone team. And we just weren't ready for it. My corners were not ready for it. We were so soft on so many different things. And he had these like NFL concepts, I think. And we talk about Shanahan and McVay, but let's be honest, like a lot of these condensed concepts, the NFL is a lot of times is getting in condensed concepts because what do you do when you have a lot of cover one? You get in these condensed concepts and you run crossing routes and you pick each other and you do these rub routes. So I just remember vividly that game will always live in my mind that he got in there and he ran screens out of it. They ran the ball out of it. We're seeing more and more high school teams get in bunch sets and just run duo, right? Just downhill. That corner's not going to make a tackle. Or, you know, hey, we've got this corner. Where's your weakest corner? That's who we're going to set. That we're going to put either go FIB because your boundary corner is just a cover guy, or we're going to do it to the field the whole time because your field corner, you know, is just kind of a zone kid. And, you know, he's soft and you're trying to hide him. Well, we're going to get a duo. We're going to roll it right off the table and we're going to force him to make a tackle. So I remember that vividly as something that I think too, like high school guys, if you want to get some of these soft edges, you run condensed sets because it's so hard for a defense to create a hard edge on a condensed set, because I either have to take an outside linebacker, walk him up as a wide 9. Now I've created a bubble inside, right? Or I keep him off and now I have a hard corner who now I've got an edge defender in conflict, because now he's got to fit the run, but then also if I go play action or anything, now I've got a quick outlet pass. If it, let's say, and two, I think one thing that and you see it in the NFL, you see it in flex bone offenses a ton, is quick motion out of a condensed set. Create a quick 3x1. Oh man, it's like stealing candy from a baby. We used to work it because we saw it all the time because at Midlothian we were flex bone, so we would get that jet motion, and so we have to work these rotations. And how do we play this? This is where the infamous Maui call came from of our double switch, where it's almost turned into a pseudo corner blitz. How do you create hard edges? And luckily, I had 2 corners that didn't mind tackling at Midlothian, so we were fine. But that to me, that was always like, what am I going to work on? What am I afraid of? Is like, man, if they get in 2x2 condensed set, like we're totally screwed. And I think we'll go back to it, you know, the Alex Gibbs, your corners are just as bad as ours in the NFL at tackling. And it's so true. You know, corners are covers first mentality, attacking the soft areas on that. I think that to me is what it is. So 12 personnel, I think is going to be big, right? And getting into these different 11 personnel. Well, look, and that concludes part 1 of our NFL Trends series that I'm doing with Shawn Syed. Now, you can find him at Syed Skeens on Twitter. I would suggest that you go to follow him. He drops nice content on offense and defensive side. I know he was more focused on offense today, but Shawn and I really became good friends when we talked about defense and when he followed me around as a coach. So make sure to follow him. Make sure to follow Sumer Sports as well. A lot of those guys over there are friends of mine, doing a great job over there. In fact, I was just on one of their podcasts just recently. So again, thanks for joining us on the Art of X Show. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share, and we'll see you next week.